Hi guys, welcome back to the Small Barn Workshop. Every project, large or small, has a critical path. A critical path can be seen as a set of gateways that need to be achieved to unlock other activities within the project. I have now got to the part of the project where I need a router table to unlock some activities on the bench and also other parts of the workshop. At present, I haven't got room for a large all singing, all dancing router table. That build will be much later. So for now, I'm making a much smaller router table top that is designed to be supported by my cantilever workbench calls. In fact, the supports and the router table were built at the same time, and it's hard to know which came first, router table or the supports. So let's get into the build. I'm using my Triton router, which was a firm favourite in the small loft workshop, which is supported in the Kreg Router plate. The top is an offcut 600mm by 500mm of 18mm melamine face chipboard, which at the moment I have an abundance of around the workshop. At 18mm thick, the MFC is not quite thick enough for what I need, so I've ripped some 12mm plywood into 50mm strips, cut an angle on one end at the miter saw, and then fix them around the router plate to create a template. The plywood has two uses. Firstly, it thickens the top and gives me a guide to cut out the hole for the router plate, and I will come on to the second use in a few minutes. Before I can glue and screw the plywood to the underside of the MFC, I just score the face with a Stanley knife and rough it up with some sandpaper. Now I can spread my glue and fix the plywood in place. And no matter how well you've calculated the screw length, you cannot help but to check that you haven't put the screw points through the face of the top. Now here's where the bench supports and the router table build converge, because I needed the bench supports to support the router top for the next phase. To open up the hole for the router plate, firstly I drill a couple of holes in the corners with a small Forstner bit, and then using the jigsaw roughly cut out the hole. I already had a bearing copying cutter set in this trend router, a little router that doesn't get much air on this channel. I bought it a few years ago to build my staircase. Like all trend routers, it's a fantastic piece of kit. To finalise the hole, I just need to run the router around this hole with the bearing pressing against the plywood. And now it's just a case of flipping the top over and taking any sharp edge off the MFC with some sandpaper. The moment of truth, does the plate fit the hole? And actually yes, it fits perfectly, other than the radiuses in the corner are not correct, but I wasn't going to buy a new router cutter just to make this hole. The second reason I'm using the plywood to thicken this top is I want to use my Kreg router support plates that I again took off the old router table in the small loft workshop. For these to work effectively, the top really needs to be 25mm or an inch thick. The best way I've found to mount these is to invert the top and to fix them one at a time, ensuring that the bolt is properly aligned with the hole before they are screwed down. That way, every time the plate is removed and refixed, the bolts line up perfectly. And it also ensures it fits the other router table plates I have made. Once all plates are fixed, it's just a case of winding up or down the grub screws in the support plates to perfectly align the face of the router plate with the face of the router table top. And once aligned, the mounting bolts can be fully tightened. Okay, so let's hide the ugly edges of the MFC with some nosings. Here I'm cutting up some inch softwood, which actually came with me from the small loft workshop. There are 4 nosings. The rear one is as thick as the MFC top, 18mm, to allow it to locate on the cantilever support bars. The front and 2 side nosings are nominally 2 inch deep. All the nosings are run through the Triton planer just to smooth off the saw marks. The rear nosing is glued and left long, and I cut the excess timber off whilst it is in the clamps drying. I pre-cut the nosings to the side and the front to length before I glue them. And I'm configuring the nosings in such a way that the sides overlap the back and the front overlap the side. Because the long edges of the MFC sheets were edge banded, and I've not removed this edge band, I figured the glue would not stick very well, so I'm going to insert some dominoes to support the nosings. Now this is not really necessary, you don't need a domino to do this, but as I explained a couple of videos ago, I've been separated from some of my better tools for a long time, so I like to get them out of the box and use them. Previously I had the 10mm cutter installed in the domino, so here I'm swapping that cutter out for the 5mm version. In the sides I'm putting 3 dominoes. In the front I'm putting 4, and I'm cutting all these slots with the medium setting just to give me a little bit of lateral play when I glue the nosings on. I clamped the nosings in pairs to the router table top. That way it gave me a little bit more seating for the plate of the domino. Here I'm just making sure that the end of the nosing is flush with the front of the table. And as with the other nosing, it needed a little bit of micro adjustment with the hammer. I'm using Gorilla PVA glue here, which is my favourite brand, and it has a clamp time of about 10 minutes, so it lets you get through this nosing process quite quickly. So with the side nosings in clamps, I can still carry on fitting the front nosing. One other benefit of my cantilever bench supports is it gives you a void under the workpiece to pass clamps through. So here I've got clamps above and below the workpiece. And once the clamps are off, it's just a case of sanding the nosings flush and smooth, and then running a router bit round the top just to ease the corners. Notice how I am routering backwards across the end grade to minimise breakout. And in a nutshell, that's how I built my small router table top. In use, it's clamped to my cantilever bars, which gives good access to the top and also the underside of the router. I'm using the router fence that I had made previously in the small loft workshop. Wherever possible, I prefer to use a featherboard when routering stock. These I picked up cheap off eBay. Last year I also made these router plate inserts which can replace the Kreg plate for different applications. This one is a miniature MFT top which is great for clamping for fine woodworking. And this one is purposely built for my small Makita palm router for when using 1/4 inch bits. Sometimes it can be quicker to swap out the router rather than swap between an 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch collet. That, in a nutshell, is how I built my small router table top. If you want to see how I built my fence or the router insert plates, then the links to those two videos are here.